Is sim racing actually a valid form of physical exercise? Will sim racing get you jacked? No, it absolutely won't. But can sim racing improve your physical fitness? That is the question. Hey guys, this is Matt at H Pattern Labs. Thanks for tuning in. Happy to be here. Today, we're going to try to answer this question together. For a long time now, probably since the dawn of force feedback wheels in sim racing, people have asked, what is the relationship between sim racing and physical fitness? Will exercising make you faster? At this point, it's pretty well established that maintaining a certain level of physical fitness will have benefits for both real life racing and sim racing. I mean, if you look at professional drivers like in F1, they all have to follow a pretty strict workout regime, just like any other professional athlete. Racing requires both physical endurance and mental stamina, two things that physical exercise will improve. And this is true for both real life racing and sim racing. But is the reverse also true? Can sim racing improve physical fitness? Now, I don't think anybody in their right mind would ever suggest sim racing as a replacement for running or weightlifting or any other form of aerobic or anaerobic exercise. But is there a way that we can actually see how it compares? And what if there is a way to actually increase the intensity and turn sim racing into a valid form of exercise while maintaining the fun side of the hobby that we all love? Well, I checked online and couldn't find a satisfactory answer. So in this video, I'm going to conduct a simple experiment and try to find out. Now, why am I doing this? Well, the other day, something popped up in my feed where this guy was talking about how we go into our hobbies as a form of escapism. Now, some guys will go to the gym, and at least that way they're working on themselves, which is a good thing. But other guys will just sit and play video games, which is bad, apparently. But it got me thinking, when I'm over there gaming on my rig, I come away from it sweaty, my muscles are sore, and I feel pretty drained. Spend half an hour to an hour on the rig, and it's hard to argue that we as sim racers aren't getting some form of exercise here. We may not realize it, but our bodies do. Now, how much exercise? And is it at all comparable to real exercise? That drain we feel after sim racing, is that coming purely from the mental strain of maintaining focus over an extended period of time? Or is there actual, tangible physical exertion involved that may be beneficial to physical fitness? First, we're going to go over my testing method. Then, I'm going to go and gather some data from various activities and exercises and compare that to a typical sim racing session. Then, I'm going to attempt to increase the intensity of sim racing. Finally, we're going to go over the data together and we're going to see what conclusions we can draw from it. If you want to skip ahead, timestamps are down below. All right, let's start off with the testing method. First off, let's get this out of the way. I'm not a medical professional or some kind of exercise science expert. If you are, and my understanding is incomplete in any way, or if you have some tips on how I can improve this test, please let me know in the comments. I'm also not a professional athlete or a bodybuilder. I'm just an average dude in my late 30s. I weigh 195 pounds and I like to sim race on my spare time. I do exercise regularly. I'm in the gym about 5 days a week, but I like to eat tasty food. Now, my fitness could always be better, but I'd say I'm in pretty good health. In other words, I think I'm a pretty good representation of the average sim racer and a good enough test subject. But your results may differ from mine. All right, let's get started. I'm going to test for level of exertion across different activities and exercises using a chest-strapped heart rate monitor. Now, I'm using heart rate here because I think it's the best way to actually quantify level of exertion across different activities while ignoring perceived stress. Just because I feel more tired after an activity doesn't mean that I'm actually exerting myself more. That post-race drain that we feel probably has more to do with mental fatigue than physical exertion. Hopefully, by only looking at heart rate, we can account for that. Additionally, with heart rate, we can derive an estimated calorie burn from each activity. Now, I'll be doing this using this inexpensive heart rate monitor that I bought off of Amazon. Now, the reviews say that it's just as accurate as the higher-end consumer-grade heart rate monitors, but it lacks a few extra features that I won't be using for this test anyways. Now, the reliability seems a little bit questionable, so we'll just hope for the best. For the activities and exercises, I'll be taking my average heart rate during a typical session of the following. 1. Resting heart rate, sitting at my sim rig. 2. Heart rate during a casual walk. 3. Heart rate during a light jog. 4. Heart rate during a 5K run. And 5. Heart rate during a weightlifting workout. Then, I'll record 2 types of sim racing tests. First, heart rate during a typical 30-minute sim racing session. I'll be using my current sim rig with my current everyday settings. Right now, I can only really test to see how my own personal sim racing sessions stack up against my own workouts. So, when sim racing, I use my Moza R12 at 12 Newton meters with the CRP2 load cell pedals at the GT resistance. If I were using a belt-driven 3 Newton meter Thrustmaster or a 25 Newton meter Simucube DD, my results here would be different. Also, I won't be using motion here, but I do have a feeling that there could be a bit to gain in terms of core strength and endurance by incorporating a full motion system. Maybe a good idea for a future test? Also, this test will be done in iRacing with a car and track that I'm familiar with in a standard 30-minute race against bots. Now, why bots? Well, at least for me, when racing online, I always get a crazy adrenaline spike. When going wheel to wheel using my real name with my iRating on the line, that fight or flight kicks in and my heart goes racing. Now, that increased heart rate is purely chemical and has no corresponding muscular activation. Therefore, it'll skew the results. I only want to measure the physical exertion from actual sustained sim racing, and I believe that this can be achieved by racing against the bots in a zero-stakes single-player race. Finally, we're going to get a little ridiculous. 7. Heart rate with an increased intensity sim rig setup. I want to see if we can increase the exertion by any measurable amount by increasing the intensity of the sim racing experience. To achieve this, my Moza R12 will be turned up to 100, requiring more muscular activation to simply turn the wheel. I'll also be wearing wrist weights, I'm thinking 2 pounds per each arm, as well as engaging the chest and shoulders by attaching rubber bandos to each arm and then to the seat. In theory, this will work like underwater resistance training for boxers or runners. Now, one last thing, I did think about increasing the resistance in my load cell pedals, but ultimately decided against it. When racing, I only ever use my left foot to brake, so all of the exertion would only ever come from one leg. Therefore, I'll just stick with my regular pedal setup for this test. Alright, let's get started with the resting heart rate. I'm recording resting heart rate just sitting here at my rig, doing nothing for 10 minutes, and then taking my average heart rate over the following 10 minutes. Now, I feel the need to asterisk this because I have had my morning coffee, and, to my knowledge, resting heart rate should be taken first thing in the morning, with no caffeine in your system. Unfortunately, at the time of recording, I've spent roughly 2 decades now highly caffeinated. I feel like whatever we get here just is my resting heart rate. Anyways, during this time lapse, I'll explain a little bit more about my heart rate monitor setup. I'm using the Cuspo H808S heart rate monitor that I mentioned earlier. Now, if you're like me and have never used or even seen a heart rate monitor before now, they don't really do anything on their own. It just senses my heart rate, then transmits it over Bluetooth to an app, which is what you use to actually monitor and record your heart rate and other stats. For this test, I'm using an app called Polar Beat, which is displayed on screen now. I'm using it because it gives me the average heart rate, maximum heart rate, calorie burn, and heart rate zones in a nice looking summary at the end of each session. Now, there are many apps that do the same thing, and honestly, I'm using Polar Beat because it just looks the best. Seriously, app developers, if you haven't figured out dark mode yet in the year 2026, what are you even doing? You may have noticed that on my 4th monitor, I have my heart rate displayed in this awesome looking green ECG. Well, it's fake and I apologize for the deception. It's another app called HypeRate that is used for streaming real-time heart rate. It has many different customizable widgets that you can overlay onto your screen so you could, for example, display your heart rate in real time in-game. Originally, I wanted to display my heart rate with this cool-looking ECG using HypeRate and then record the session stats using Polar Beat. Unfortunately, this isn't possible with the Kussbo H808S, and here's what I wish I knew before buying a heart rate monitor. If you're wondering what the difference is between the cheaper, low-end monitors and the higher-end ones that cost 3 to 4 times as much, well, for one, the cheaper ones only have one single Bluetooth connection, while the higher-end ones usually have 2 or more, so you could connect the monitor to multiple apps, or to your phone and PC at the same time. This means that with the lower-end Kussbo H808S, I can only pair it to one app at a time. I can't connect it to both Polar Beat and HypeRate at the same time. And because there's no single app on the market that can display your heart rate in real time with a good-looking ECG and will record your session stats in a good-looking summary, I was out of luck. Again, app developers, nudge nudge. Therefore, because getting and recording accurate data is more important to me, I will only be using Polar Beat for these sessions. Let's take a look at it. As we can see, at the end of the 10 minutes, my average resting heart rate was 60 beats per minute. I burned 14 calories just sitting here. Good job, me. Well, sitting here doing nothing for 20 minutes straight was the hardest part of the entire test. Let's move on. For the casual walk and the light jog, there isn't a whole lot to show or talk about, so we'll cover these pretty quickly. For the walk, I walked for 30 minutes at a constant speed of 3 miles per hour, covering a distance of 1.5 miles. My average heart rate was 93 beats per minute and I burned 136 calories. For the light jog, I jogged for 30 minutes at a constant speed of 5.5 miles per hour, covering a distance of 2.75 miles. My average heart rate was 145 beats per minute and I burned 412 calories. Again, not much to talk about here, but I wanted the data to see how these activities compare to sim racing. To keep the walk, jog, and 5K run consistent, all 3 were conducted on a treadmill. Let's record these and move on to the 5K run. Now, my typical 5K run is a bit more interesting. As we can see here, it takes me about 25.5 minutes to run 5K, or 3.11 miles, with a pace of 8 minutes and 12 seconds per mile. My average heart rate was 164 beats per minute, hitting a maximum of 181 beats per minute, just under my theoretical maximum of 182 beats per minute. This run burned an estimated 439 calories. Now, when I run my 5K, I typically start off slower at a 6 mile per hour jog, then steadily increase the speed during the run to 8 miles per hour. Then try to finish off with a maximum exertion burst at 9 miles per hour. We see this reflected in the heart rate zone chart over time. In order to properly compare this to sim racing and other tests, we need to understand what is going on here. So let's take a look. For an extremely simplified explanation of running, oxygen first enters the bloodstream via the lungs. The heart pumps that oxygenated blood throughout the body, supplying oxygen to the muscles. When running, these leg muscles need more and more oxygen. In order to increase the supply of oxygen, the heart needs to pump more blood, so it pumps faster. Thus, heart rate increases. The oxygen is used to break down stored carbs, glycogen, converting it into energy. This is aerobic exercise. At a certain point, your heart reaches the limit of oxygen that it can supply. In order to keep going, your body recruits your fast-twitch muscle groups, which don't have the same oxygen requirements. These muscle groups skip the oxygen, but still break down stored glycogen, converting it into energy and releasing lactic acid as a result, which causes the burning feeling in your muscles. This is anaerobic exercise. Now, all of this is to say that in a hard run, we cross the line from aerobic to anaerobic exercise. If we go back to my results, we can see, from rest, my heart rate immediately jumps up at the start of the run. Within the first couple minutes, my heart rate is in zone 4 at 146 beats per minute. It then gradually increases along with speed for the remainder of the run. This period in zone 4 shows my body's transition from aerobic to anaerobic exercise. At the 10-minute mark, I've hit 7 miles per hour, where I enter zone 5 and stay there for the final 15 minutes. At this point, my body is conducting the run mostly anaerobically. The continued increase in heart rate up to the maximum of 181 beats per minute is actually being caused by heat buildup, dehydration, and stress. Running like this probably isn't the healthiest or most efficient way to train, but running also is not my strong suit. If you look at my legs, I'm riding on a pair of extremely thick meat chariots. They need a lot of juice to run. It probably doesn't take much for them to put me into zone 5. That being said, there are many health benefits. The 400 or so calories burned is just the start, as that calorie burn continues long after the run has ended. To wrap this up, over time, running like this is like upgrading the engine on your car. You improve your cardiovascular system by upgrading the lungs with a turbocharger and the heart with a high-flow fuel pump, maintaining system pressure at high RPM. By training those fast-twitch muscles, which are responsible for speed and power, we're fitting high-compression pistons that deliver more of that explosive torque so we can zoom. The result? Usable horsepower that goes way beyond what a simple heart rate chart can measure. In the next section, we'll see how this differs from weightlifting. Now, let's take a look at one of my typical weightlifting workouts. My workouts are usually low to medium intensity and consist of a mix of high weight, low rep, long rest strength training, and high rep, low weight, short rest hypertrophy. Looking at the results, we see that over the 30-minute session, my average heart rate was 113 beats per minute, with a max of 148 beats per minute, and I burned 256 calories in the process. Looking at the heart rate zone chart, we see a fairly typical example of a weightlifting workout. The majority of the session was spent in zone 2, with zones 1 and 2 making up 80% of the entire workout. This 80% represents the rest and recovery period in between sets. Resting, loading plates, changing equipment, etc. The remaining 20% spent in Zone 3 shows the time spent actually lifting during a set. The 80% is our aerobic system in action. Oxygen is being supplied to refresh the muscles for the next set. We are resting, so no work is being done, and the heart can easily supply the oxygen. The other 20% is our anaerobic system. During a lift, the muscles are using their stored energy, not relying on oxygen, for a short burst of power. Once that energy is depleted, the aerobic system kicks back in to restore energy. This workout burned 256 calories, but just like the 5K run, that 256 calories is just the start. For the next 24 to 48 hours after a workout, when resting, the body is actively burning energy to rebuild your muscles. You see, during weightlifting, when we contract our muscles, we are actually destroying the muscle at the microscopic level with micro tears, so that they can be rebuilt harder, better, faster, stronger during rest. Now, there are 3 types of muscle contractions: concentric, eccentric, and isometric. These micro tears are mostly applied during the concentric and eccentric muscle contractions, essentially the upward and downward parts of a movement. Picture a bench press. The upward motion, lifting the bar off your chest and pushing up, is the concentric action. When you lower the bar back down to your chest, you are applying resistance to it so that it doesn't just fall on you. That is the eccentric movement. It is these movements, concentric and eccentric, that are the primary drivers ultimately leading to muscle growth. Keep this in mind as we move on to the next and final tests, the sim racing sessions. Finally, it's time to get back in the sim. Once again, I'm doing this using my Moza R12, a 12 Nm wheelbase, using my normal, everyday settings, running a 30-minute race against bots. I'm using my car of choice, the AMG GT3, in all of its majesty. For the track, again, I wanted to run a track that I'm already familiar with. I also wanted to work both my arms equally, so I'm looking for tracks with a similar number of left and right turns. Lastly, I wanted to have a good number of both tight corners and long high-speed turns, throwing in as many alternating curves as possible. I want it to be a workout. Now, if there's one track that comes to mind when I think of workouts, it's this one, Suzuka. It ticks all of the boxes. Going through the first sector S's up to Dunlop, then hairpin followed by the double apex at Spoon, and the next section, when I up the intensity, will be absolutely brutal. Alright, let's get to it. Kicking off, we see that starting from rest, heart rate immediately jumps in the 80 BPM range. Now, some of this will be due to external stimulus, but some will be due to the sudden muscle activation. Notice that lagging behind the more demanding sections of the track, such as the S's, heart rate jumps up, hitting its peaks in the 90s. Following the less demanding sections, the straights, it falls back down to the low 80s. This tells us that there's definitely physical exertion being demonstrated. However, calorie burn remains low. Looking at the results for the end of the session, we see that average heart rate was 82 beats per minute, with a max at 95 beats per minute. We barely even made it into zone 1, only hitting above 91 beats per minute a handful of times. At the end of the session, we only burned 83 calories. In fact, in terms of pure fat-burning fitness potential, 30 minutes of sim racing isn't even as much exercise as taking a 30-minute walk. Does this mean that we should just call it a day and end this experiment now? Well, not quite. Sure, when looking at the aerobic exercises, walking, jogging, running, etc., no, sim racing doesn't compare. But sim racing isn't an aerobic activity. Let's take a look back at weightlifting with its concentric, eccentric, and isometric muscle contractions. We said that weightlifting primarily uses concentric and eccentric movements of the muscle through its full range of motion. Movement means work, and work means calories. These movements are what cause micro tears in the muscle, ultimately leading to muscle growth as those micro tears are repaired. Furthermore, that repairing of muscle burns a ton of calories in the process, as many, if not more, than were burned during the workout itself. As for that third type of muscle contraction, isometric, it occurs when there is contraction but no movement of the muscle. The muscle is, in fact, resisting movement. Think of a plank or a wall sit. The muscle contraction is literally squeezing the blood vessels shut, which causes a spike in heart rate. However, with these exercises, there is no movement, and once again, movement means work, and work means calories. With isometric exercises, we expect increased heart rate with low calorie burn. When sim racing, we are actually mostly using isometric contraction. There's a bit of push-pull for sure, but essentially, our muscles are resisting the movement of the wheel. Now, isometric contraction does produce micro tears, and therefore muscle growth, but not in the same way or as effectively as eccentric and concentric movements. At the risk of oversimplifying things, think about wall sits again. If you trained wall sits every day, keeping your knees at 90 degrees, you will be developing only those muscles in only that position. In other words, you're only going to get very good at doing wall sits and keeping your knees at 90 degrees. Now, there's much more to it than that, and while they won't develop muscle size or strength like eccentric and concentric movements, isometrics really do have their benefits and uses, which I'll expand on more in the final test, the increased intensity sim racing session. Looking back at the results from the normal sim racing session, we see that although we're exerting ourselves, sim racing is not on the level of traditional exercise. But now that we've narrowed down what type of activity sim racing is, isometric, we can attempt to increase the exertion and try to turn it into real exercise. Incorporating aerobics or concentric eccentric movements would fundamentally change the experience of sim racing. So, we'll ignore those. Instead, we'll focus on increasing the intensity of the isometric contractions. For this test, I'll be using these. As promised, I'll be engaging the chest and shoulders using this 30-pound rubber bando. These 5-pound ankle weights will be worn on the wrists. And I've included another 50-pound rubber bando to apply resistance to the legs. Bonus: getting strapped in counts as yoga. The idea here is to increase the amount of exertion involved in just holding the seated position during sim racing. There are more things that I'd like to try in the future, but for this test, this is what I have. Up top, my chest, shoulders, and triceps, and to an extent my core, are being engaged just sitting here. Down below, my quads and calves. With everything in place, we're ready to head back to Suzuka. Right away, we see that my baseline exertion is already increased, with my heart rate starting at its low of 79 beats per minute. At the start of the race, my heart rate immediately climbs through the 80s, into the 90s, and spiking in the low hundreds, following the same pattern as the normal sim racing session. This puts us into Zone 1 training, where we stay for a large part of the session. Overall, I found this to be pretty challenging. I decided to mute the sound in this clip to spare you from the grunting and cursing. But the level of exertion definitely felt higher than the heart rate monitor shows. The sweat coming through my shirt by the end of the race was proof of this. Now, while turning the wheel wasn't necessarily tougher, simply moving at all while under that level of tension got increasingly more difficult. As a result, I felt that I was engaging my core more, leaning with my whole body to turn instead of just my arms. Partway through the session, around the 7 or 8 minute mark, we start to actually see the heart rate declining. This is also typical of isometric exercises. A sudden spike at the start of the exercise, followed by a plateau, then a steady decline as the body adapts. This adaptation includes shifting the load to other parts of the body. The level of exertion remains the same, but it is being subconsciously applied elsewhere, such as, in my case, the core. Also, doing this for 30 minutes straight would not be possible without managing breathing, taking steady controlled breaths, and short resting when possible by taking the hands off the wheel and easing tension. As a result, although the level of exertion hasn't changed, our average heart rate actually decreases towards the end of the session. However, once again, as expected with isometrics, calorie burn remains pretty low. At the end of this session, my average heart rate was 90 beats per minute, with a max of 106 beats per minute, burning an estimated 120 calories in the process. Still, we've been able to move up into zone 1. Well, with this simple test, I believe that I achieved what I'd set out to do with it, which was to increase the level of physical exertion while still being able to enjoy sim racing. With this, we can try to answer the question we asked at the start of this video. Is sim racing actually exercise?
See ya.
When talking about physical fitness, comparing sim racing to virtually any other form of exercise, we see that there are much more effective ways to spend your time. If we look at the results we got from each activity, the numbers speak for themselves. In terms of both heart rate and calorie burn, even after increasing the intensity, sim racing scored the lowest. And while the numbers don't tell the whole story, they do tell a very convincing one. If your goal is to build muscle, burn fat, or improve cardio, sim racing simply does not compare to traditional forms of exercise. But, as I believe we've demonstrated, sim racing is an isometric activity, and the goal of isometrics is not to build muscle, burn fat, or improve cardio. So, what are isometrics used for? Well, the primary benefit of isometric exercise is to improve your structural strength, and that structural strength is important for just about every other type of exercise. For example, picture a squat. Doing isometric exercises, such as planks to strengthen your core or wall sits for lower body, are very beneficial to maintaining stability during a squat, allowing you to push heavier weight. Having a strong core is important for keeping your entire body stable throughout the entire movement, while wall sits will help you when at the sticking point, which is the point of an exercise where you are most likely to fail, at the maximum point of the eccentric movement. In this case, the sticking point is the lowest point during the squat. Having improved strength and stability here will help you to push past that point of failure. Now, while isometrics do build small amounts of isolated muscle and burn some calories, what they are really strengthening are your tendons and ligaments, which are important for every other type of exercise. In other words, while isometrics may not be complete exercise on their own, they can play a very important supporting role, which is to allow you to perform other exercises better. Now, as for sim racing, well, first I want to point out that when I started making this video, I had no preconceived notions. I honestly did not know whether sim racing could be considered exercise or not, which is why I wanted to conduct this little test and find out for myself. Now, my mistake was that I thought sim racing would be targeting the large muscle groups directly, namely the chest, triceps, and quads. And while these muscle groups were engaged for sure, in reality, when I increased the intensity, I found that grip strength, forearms, and core were engaged the most, with, I believe, knock-on benefits for wrist, elbow, shoulder, and knee health. Now, there is a ton of research out there on the benefits of isometric exercise, which I encourage you to check out. And while the experts say that Isometric exercise can enhance sports performance by increasing maximum strength, rate of force development, and tendon stiffness. Could sim racing offer the same benefit? Could you include sim racing as part of your workout regime? Well, I'll just let the experts decide that one. For me, the next step will be to rethink my testing method. What I learned was that sim racing can't be compared to traditional forms of exercise at all. Instead, it needs to be compared to other isometric exercises, and we'll need to find a way to determine what tangible benefits sim racing as an isometric exercise could provide. Finally, I intend to expand on this whole thing much more in the future. While conducting this little experiment, I learned some very interesting things, such as how I believe this could be used to measurably make you faster in sim, as well as some very surprising things about our sim racing hardware. Would you like to know more? Well, click that little subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Matt at H Panel Labs. Thanks for watching. Bye.
See ya.